Welcome to AP lesson number 3 on entering invoices and credit memos. I'm in the AP Center and I'm going to show you how to enter invoices and credit memos. But before we can do that, we need to find a vendor. So I'm automatically in the S name field, or you can click into it if your cursor's not there. But as you come into the screen, that's where you will be placed. So automatically Cobra thinks you're going to want to find a vendor. So you can start typing in a part of a vendor name, and as you press enter, you'll get a small list of vendors that have whatever you typed in it in that S name. Now, in the screen too, you can also find vendors by just name, phone number, and address. So you can click on these little buttons and start typing in how you want to find the vendor. Once you do see the vendor that you want, you can double click on it and bring it out to the main AP Center screen. Now, to enter an invoice or a credit memo, it's very simple. You just click into the invoice button on the toolbar and it opens up the invoice credit memo entry screen. Now, as you come into here, you will always see the invoice option highlighted. So there's really not much difference to you between entering an invoice and a credit memo other than clicking the appropriate button, because then Cobra will do the rest. You don't have to invert your numbers, make them negative if you're entering a credit memo. You don't have to do any of that. So that's really the difference between entering the two, is just clicking credit memo over invoice. Now, as you can see here, the vendor that was on the main AP Center screen is displayed here. But you can click into this and select a different vendor. So if you're entering multiple invoices for different vendors, you can quickly get at the vendor list right in this little drop down. But I'm going to press enter and go through some of these main fields here and enter an invoice. As I enter an invoice, obviously I have an invoice number, and the invoice date is something that should reflect the date of the invoice that you're entering. So usually the day is what you need to change. So what I do is use my little right arrow next to my 10 keypad, my right arrow, to bring me to the date field, and I'll enter the date of the invoice. Now, if you're entering the invoice in the wrong month, what Cobra is going to do is look at the bottom of the screen where it shows you the current date and your Cobra date, the date that you went into Cobra. If the Cobra date is different than the actual date in terms of the month that you're working in, Cobra will not let you save this invoice to the wrong period, so that your accounting and your aging can be in sync. So if you do get that warning, just remember to be aware of your invoice date. If it's not in the same month as the current date, you'll want to back out of here, double click on your Cobra date, set it back to the month that you're entering it for, and then go forward from there. So that can happen. There we go. Now I'm on the correct date. Go back into invoice entry, and we'll do that again. Now, look at what happened here. What Cobra did was calculated your discount date and your due date based on the information set up with the vendor on the main AP Center screen. Now, you can override these, obviously, but these are going to be pretty accurate. Now, because this invoice is dated on the 1st of November, the discount isn't going to be till the 10th of the next month, and that's what that statement day did. Remember the statement day on the main vendor entry screen, is it tells Cobra which month is that discount going to be based on, according to the invoice date. So had I entered an invoice, let's say after the 10th of the month, let's say it's on the 15th, then you can see how it'll calculate the discount date and the due date. So I'll set this back to 11/01. Now, the invoice amount. This is the total invoice amount, obviously. I'll enter $1,000 just so I can show you in even numbers here what we're looking at. There's your discount amount. As you press enter, you can automatically have Cobra calculate your discount amount based on the invoice amount, in this case $10. But later on, in the AP defaults, which is found under the AP menu bar option, you can tell Cobra to recalculate your discount based on whatever main material expense account you expense the material portion of the invoice to. So a lot of neat options in that regard. Now I'm not going to worry about entering to a job number right at this point, because if you're entering invoices for the first time just to kind of get your AP caught up with your old system, you might not be job costing at this point. So you might be even entering just statement balances into the AP just to, again, get your AP caught up with your existing system. So I'm going to leave the PO and the job number fields alone and talk strictly about AP. Now this is where we can expense that $1,000 out into the 3 main expense accounts for the vendor, and even more than that. So we're not limited to these 3. So I'm going to show you that, okay? Obviously, if all you need are the first 3 accounts, that's cool, because these, especially for suppliers, are the main accounts that you would break an invoice out into. But let me show you what can happen if you need to expense to more than just these 3 accounts, okay? So take that $1,000 and say, well, really $800 of it is material, and then $50 of it is freight, and $60 of it is sales tax, for example. You know, you'll have exact numbers, obviously, working off of invoices. But what happens here is, as you're pressing enter through here, if I press enter at this point on the tax amount, what Cobra will do is add up what's on all 3 of these fields. If they add up to the $1,000 or the invoice amount, the save button becomes visible and you can save your invoice entry. You're done. But if they don't add up to the full invoice amount, and when you press enter at this point, Cobra will recognize that and open up this window where we can continue expensing out an invoice to as many accounts as we need to. It shows us here that we have $90 to continue expensing to many different accounts. So I can, using my chart of accounts up here, expense to as many accounts as I need to. Maybe there's a small tool expense, you know, any additional expenses, so you can continue expensing at this point. Maybe part of it goes to travel, part of it goes to small tool, or, you know, whatever. So until this equals 0, Cobra will not let you exit out of this window, because we want to make sure everything's in balance. Now, if you notice at the bottom of this screen, the selected accounts window, this shows you how you expensed it out. Now, if something is incorrect, like this line, we can double click on it to put it back into what's remaining to expense, and we can continue expensing it to, again, as many accounts as we need to from our chart. So just to get this done, I will select that account, and then now I can exit the screen. Just try it. If this doesn't equal 0, it won't let you out of here. So at this point then, the save button becomes highlighted, and I'm done with the invoice entry. Now, one of the things I did to make the invoice entry a little bit faster was I put a check mark down here where it says skip right side, go directly to save. That saves me a lot of time, but if you find that you're going to the right side of the screen a lot and you have to click over there, then you can take the check mark out of here, so you can use this screen, kind of customize it. Each user on your network can customize it. But at any time as you're entering an invoice, you can go to the right side of the screen and change the pay to. For example, if you're entering an invoice to a miscellaneous vendor, for example, but then you want to come in and actually type in the pay to for that vendor, you can do that just by clicking into the right side of the screen here. So now that my invoice is entered, my aging will pick it up. I could at this point though go into the manual check writer, and I'll take you in there just to show you what it looks like. It's very simple. At any time you can either print or just record a manually written check. Okay. Now, the reason the check amount says $10 less is because of that discount. So, even though I entered it for $1,000, if I pay it today, you'd be paying $990 based on how the invoice was entered. So you do have that option to print or just record a manually written check. But let's see what's happened now with this invoice. I'm going to exit out of here, and I'm going to go into the status button. You're going to like this button because this allows you to see all of the invoices for any particular vendor. Now you can say I want to see just open invoices or just paid ones. I can limit them to a date range by clicking this, entering the date range, and then clicking load. So I have all sorts of options as I work in this window. But when I want to look at an invoice, if I wanted to see how it was expensed out, what I can do is click on that invoice and go down to the bottom and click on the View Accounting Records button, where I can see how it was expensed out. Now you can see all the accounting records during the life of this invoice. So if it's been partially paid, or if you canceled a check, or canceled the invoice altogether, you can see all that information right in this window. Now if you notice this little legend here, this is very important to help you understand what happened during the life of the invoice. Now all these type 1s here show us that they were created when we entered the invoice originally. You will begin to see type 2 records in here as you begin making payments against the invoice. And then if you cancel a check or cancel the invoice, you will see type 3 and type 4 records in here too. So this is creating the accounting records as you are actually using the system real time. It's just whether or not those accounting records are going to the GL. That's totally up to you, and that's handled on the GL side. But if we look in here, we can see that nothing has hit the GL yet because there are no dates in this column, and there are no GL batch numbers either. So we know that none of this information has hit the GL yet. So we actually have some problem solving tools at this point before the information hits the GL. Kind of cool. Also at this point, you might want to take a look at the invoice maintenance button, because on an invoice you do have some options at this point if you wanted to change some of its information. Now changing some of its information is password protected, and I won't show you what the password is. So you can't change information that's critical to the accounting side of things that might throw you out of balance or something. So that can be handled with our help. Okay, so we do that on purpose so you can't get screwed up. Anyway, if you wanted to set a dispute on an invoice, you could do that in here by putting the dispute amount in here and resaving the invoice header. If you wanted to re-expense the invoice, you can do it in the Adjust Invoices window by clicking into that button. So here you can see how you originally expensed it out, and you can double click on any line and it brings it down below so you know how much you have left to expense. So then I can select the proper account from up here. So at any time you can do these kinds of entries and adjustments to it right here. So the accounting will always be in balance. We won't let you goof up on that. But you can make adjustments to how you expensed out an invoice in this screen. Very nice. And that ends the lesson on invoice and credit memo entry.